Hamilton says, let's get this economy working. First problem is the debt. How do we pay off the debt? The foreign debt is paid off by selling Western lands. The domestic debt is paid off by selling Western lands, and somebody said it's perpetual debt. You basically get, through the selling of bonds, basically, government bonds, you pay off your debt now by getting people to loan you money now so that you can pay off that debt, which of course then you've got to pay off those people in the future with that amount that they loaned you plus interest, which you pay off by the next people in line, and so on and so forth. The concept of perpetual debt. His plan is controversial for a number of reasons. Number one, some states have done a great job of paying off their debt, others have not. And remember, part of his plan is assumption of all the state debts, which of course means that some of the states that have already paid off their debt are going to be a little annoyed by that, but everybody sort of agrees to it there. Other controversial aspect, particularly with the domestic debt, is that a lot of the original debt holders had sold their debt to speculators, and those people obviously were going to get paid off in this whole process here. He also advocated for the national bank, which of course would stabilize and attempt to stimulate the American economy. Remember, this was the bank that is 1/5 public, 4/5 private. The federal government would deposit its revenue into this national bank, and then loans would be given off accordingly from there. 4/5, of course, would be who's going to invest in this bank? Wealthy Northeasterners, most likely, with money to spend, basically, and that means they're going to essentially control the nation's financial system for the most part. Hamilton actually said that's a good thing because it ties these wealthy individuals to the nation, to the success of the nation, that sort of a thing. Of course, later on down the line, Andrew Jackson and others will not like that so much. He also advocates for a tariff. Protective tariff to stimulate domestic industry, and that tariff, basically it's a tax on imported goods, making it more attractive to buy the American goods, the domestic goods, which of course once you do that, then they're going to be able to reinvest that money into their companies and make more effective and efficient practices at that point. The problem with this is everything's more expensive, particularly, and in the South, where they tend to be an export-driven economy, they're going to bear the brunt of this tax because they're not going to receive any benefit from the tariff because they don't need it, and they're going to be paying. They're going to be seeing higher prices. So it essentially means that one section of the country is going to get their money taken by a tax to stimulate another areas of the country economy. So that is why it's so objectionable there. Debt passes, bank passes, there's a little bit of a trade for those things. DC is going to become the capital, the South is going to get the capital there. The tariff does not pass. And with this plan, the wider significance of the plan is that it's going to start to sort of be the basis for what the political parties will be based on. Hamilton, of course, realizes that a lot of this stuff is not explicitly stated in the Constitution, but he is going to use what key clause? The elastic clause, the necessary and proper clause, in saying that, remember that's the one, all powers, Congress may pass laws all necessary and proper to enact and enforce all of the above, the aforesaid powers. So with some interpretation, a broad interpretation of the Constitution, you could get to that point where they can do these things. Of course, the other side, which will become the Republicans, led by Jefferson and Madison and others, is going to say that no, you need a strict read of the Constitution. You got to stick to Amendment 10, which says that all powers not explicitly stated in the Constitution are reserved to the states. You got state power versus federal power here, which of course we're talking about right now as we head into debates tomorrow about the Civil War, that sort of a thing.
We cancel that.
Of course, the other big, what you got here is also the Federalists are going to say pro-Hamilton. The Federalists are going to say Hamilton's a smart guy. Adams is a smart guy. Washington is a smart guy. We need smart guys to run the government because they're going to make good decisions for the people. We can't leave things like the French did in their French Revolution, which you saw mob violence at its worst there, and that's going to be problematic for, this is a republic, not a direct democracy, that sort of idea. The Republicans are going to say, no, no, no. Hamilton's plan is against the Constitution. We need that strict read. We need more people voting. We don't want mob rule, certainly, but we don't want, all we're creating is a different type of aristocracy, trading in the king for almost the same thing, slightly different with more people involved. That's exactly what we don't want. Whiskey Rebellion, that's the tax on whiskey. They rebel. Washington leads the troops himself. Can't protest like that anymore. And then we have the crisis with France heating up here. You have Citizen Guinea. The French are trying to make headway with the Republican Party in the mid-1790s. That cools down. Then you got the British crisis that heats up, which culminates in Jay's Treaty, which sort of eases tensions. You got the impressment stuff and that sort of things. You got troops, British troops in the West. That's sort of what this crisis was based upon. But then things ease with Jay's Treaty in 1795. Pinckney's Treaty, or the Treaty of San Lorenzo, allows for duty-free access to work markets using the Mississippi. Republicans are formed. Election of 1796, Adams versus T. Jeffs. Adams wins. Pennsylvania and New York are the key states here. Adams wins very close, 3 electoral votes, and it's very close. This leads to this doesn't lead to the French crisis, but the French crisis comes up now. The beginning is the Alphabet Affair, the XYZ Affair. You have the Quasi-War going on in the Caribbean. They catch another citizen trying to spy on the U.S. interest and incite the Republicans, Victor Collot, and this leads to something that might be mentioned tomorrow, Alien and Sedition Acts. Basically, the big one is the Sedition Act, which is almost a direct attack on freedom of speech. Alien Enemies and Alien Friends Act gives unprecedented powers to the president. The response to the Alien Sedition Acts anonymously are the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions, anonymously by the Vice President himself, Thomas Jefferson, as well as James Madison, and they say that somehow the checks and balances haven't worked, so therefore in situations like this, the state should be the final check. So you have interposition that state should and could protect liberties of its citizens, and that they could nullify objectionable federal laws. This builds into the election of 1800. Of course, a rematch here. This time, Jefferson will win, except he doesn't really win because he ties with Aaron Burr. An enemy to us all. He will end up killing Alexander Hamilton. Remember, the Federals throw their support in for Burr, and it goes to the Federals. Basically bring it to 35 ballots in the House of Reps before the Federalists turned sides, the Delaware delegation turned sides. Helping out in this was the Despicable Opinion written by Alexander Hamilton, who didn't like Adams but hated Burr a heck of a lot more. The country's on the verge of civil war here over this whole thing, but when Jefferson wins, things sort of cool down. Remember the 1790s, although it's in the middle of the necessary evil, sort of like the freedom phase of slavery, there are a couple of key events which bring us back to, which are going to re-empower slavery here. Number one, the slave revolt in Santo Domingue is going to really bring about fears in the United States South. Obviously, there's much conflict over Haiti from that point forward. There's another slave insurrection in 1800, Gabriel's Rebellion in Virginia, and the two key events. You have the You have the Fugitive Slave Act passed in 1793, as well as Eli Whitney's Cotton Gin there in 1793. Remember a couple of other things early on in the presidency here for Jefferson. Before Adams leaves, what does he try to do? Stacks the judicial branch, the stacking the midnight judges, the stacking of the judges. And that leads to Marbury versus Madison. Where Madison refuses to commission Marbury at the last minute. Marbury takes him to court, and John Marshall in the Supreme Court rules that that although Madison acted dishonorably in the situation, he did nothing illegal, and that he was justified in doing what he did. And the bigger deal is that they, in the decision, they declared that the Judiciary Act of 1789 was unconstitutional. That's the grounds by which Madison won, basically, and that is the concept of judicial review. So a very big precedent. Not used again until 1857, which of course is where they overturned the Missouri Compromise with Dred Scott. The Republican, Jefferson's, they also passed the Judiciary Act of 1801, which takes away, which gets repealed by the Republicans. So there's a battle going on in the judicial branch. Of course, the Federalists do have power for quite some time in that. Jefferson tries to impeach a couple of guys to successful in one, not so in the other. The behavior is going to be upheld. The vigorously enforcing the Sedition Acts one is not going to be upheld. Louisiana Purchase, Lewis and Clark expedition, you know what those are. Jefferson reelected, 1804. Remember, his first term in office is widely viewed as fairly successful. One of the key reasons for that is most of that time in office, the British and the French were at peace. Remember, they had been at war in the 1790s over the French Revolution and Napoleon, and there would be a war starting again in 1803, 1804 range. And that means Jefferson's second term in office is going to be a mess. This is the whole seizure of the blockade and the continental system, the Orders in Council. This is going to lead to impressment and the violation of U.S. neutral shipping rights, which leads to the Embargo Act, followed by the Non-Intercourse Act, followed by Bacon's Bill No. 2. I could give you the Non-Intercourse Act joke again, but I won't. You also have things going on in the West still. You've got the accusation the British are inciting Native Americans. Tecumseh and the Prophet, the War Hawks, remember all those guys? Tecumseh leads to the Battle of Tippecanoe, led by future President William Henry Harrison, which of course actually pushes the Native Americans to the British. This leads to a vote for war. Long story short, for the War of 1812, a lot of sound and fury signifying nothing. There's a three-pronged attack into Canada, which fails miserably. The British then try their own three-pronged attack. Canada, Washington, D.C., and New Orleans, which all fail miserably. In the meantime, right before New Orleans, of course, the Napoleonic Wars end, so the British don't really want to be at war anymore, so they decide to, and once some wins happen for the United States, the Treaty of Ghent occurs, which does antebellum status quo. No territory won or lost. Neutral shipping rights are a dead issue at that point. Impressment not addressed, but again, not an issue. And voila, we're now friends with Great Britain. Federalists are dead. Hartford Convention, a lot of nationalism there. Marshall's still alive and kicking in the Supreme Court with Dartmouth v. Woodward and McCulloch v. Maryland, which gives power to the federal government over states in both of those cases. Missouri Compromise, Maine free, Missouri slave, no more slavery north of the 3630 line, which we know what happens with that. Some good foreign policy stuff. We have good stuff with the British going on here, and of course we have the Adams-Onis Treaty, which gets East and West Florida to the United States from Spain, helped out by Jackson invading basically eastern Florida to knock out some Native Americans and find some fugitive slaves. Monroe Doctrine, no, U.S. out of European wars, American continent's not open subjects for future European colonizations. and any attempt would be seen as an unfriendly act. Boom. You got to 1820. Way further than I thought.
Oh, I thought that we were definitely. I'm prepared.